In this episode of Swing Miss, let's take a look at firing the hips to start the downswing. So let's start this video off with looking at impact. And we're going to see a few things that really are ideal for your golf swing with regards to rotation. And that's a big topic in golf instruction. It's a very cool thing if you can do it. So our golfer here has roughly 45 degrees open with his hips at impact and 37 degrees open with his rib cage. And that spine number is just the difference of the two. So 9 degrees difference. Now, we've all probably heard of most golfers, or a good benchmark for most golfers is 90 degrees closed at the top of the backswing, 45 degrees with the hips. So there's a 45 degree window as kind of an old benchmark, classic benchmark. And we can see that that vanishes by the time, or should vanish by the time we get to impact, and it shrunk down to 9 degrees. Now let's scroll back up and see if the idea of firing the hips is something that we really want to be doing to start the downswing. So as we looked at in our transition sequence video, there is a very, very tiny window. And for this golfer, it's 0.14 seconds. So it's pretty fast. It's just about as fast as you can start and stop the stopwatch on your phone. A very, very short window where the hips actually begin rotating on the downswing before the pelvis. Before the torso. But for all practical purposes, and it's such a tiny window, and that's for this golfer. We have other pros who are a much smaller window than that. For all practical purposes, everything starts rotating on the downswing very close to the same time. So with that in mind, and that happens before the club changes direction, and we're looking at when we're picking up this video when the club is starting its downswing. So if we look at our spine number here, that's the difference between the rib cage and torso. We're starting at 34 degrees and change. Let's see how that works down to left arm parallel and see if we can see this golfer firing his hips, increasing that stretch, so to speak. We can see left arm parallel. He's actually decreased it by roughly 4 degrees. So there's really zero evidence of this golfer, or really any other golfer that we've captured, of firing the hips. The reason being, the torso has 69 degrees to close on the downswing and then get open. So roughly 90 to 100 degrees of downswing rotation he's got to do in less than a quarter of a second. The hips have about half that to travel. So it doesn't make much sense to fire the hips to start the downswing. If anything, should be firing the torso to try to catch up with the hips, because they've got quite a big head start. So let's take him on down through. So that's left arm parallel. He's lost 4 degrees. Now let's take a look at shaft parallel. Now we're down to 17 degrees. So we basically cut it in half from where we are, or where we were at the top of this golfer's swing. Now let's scroll him into impact. We know it gets to about 9 degrees. And then if we scroll him past impact, we can see where right here is pretty much where the torso and the rib cage are the same. So the golfer spent from the top of the backswing to right here to get the rib cage to catch up to the torso. And then if we just wheel him on through, what's an interesting fact with this golfer is he basically gets at the finish of his swing rotationally where he was at the top of his backswing, just in reverse, with the rib cage being more open, obviously, than it was closed. But the idea, and this is one of those things as an instructor, that when you hear a golfer say, I'm trying to fire my hips to start the downswing, it's really one of those cringe-worthy kind of phrases that we hear quite often. If anything, we see amateur golfers wind up at impact with 20, 30 degrees of hip rotation, right? Not bad at all. That's certainly in the range of some professionals, with negative or barely at square or zero rib cage rotation, to where that spine number, the difference between the two is large. It's 20, 30 plus degrees. That is absolutely damaging to your ball striking. So I would much rather see the idea being to fire the rib cage more than fire the torso. The reality is they both need to get going at pretty much the same time. So if you're one of those guys or gals who thinks firing the hips from the top has been a good idea, maybe change that a little bit, because it's not something we see with the best players in the world. And I'm pretty sure it'll help your downswing if you think of more of getting these things rotating together to start the downswing, with the emphasis being on the upper body rather than the lower body.